The war in Israel has taken on so many different storylines. From the beginning of the conflict, it was Israel versus Hamas. Now it's Israel versus Hamas versus Hezbollah versus Turkey versus Syria. The United States is sucked into the middle of all of this. Iran is throwing some threats at Israel. So what is going on? Okay, so first things first, we are now in the quote-unquote new phase of operations. This is directly from the Prime Minister of Israel and other Israeli Defense Force officials. What this means is the ground invasion has started, kind of. Now, when we think of a ground invasion, we think, that's it, go straight to the capital, all tanks, all troops, march in order, and get straight to where you need to be. I know for me, when I think of ground invasion, my mind goes directly to the 2003 Iraqi invasion, where you just have miles of convoys, where one side of the convoy gets attacked, and the other side of the convoy has no idea what's going on. However, Israel seems to be doing things extremely slow and in increments. First and foremost, they are not even calling this the ground invasion. They are calling this the next phase. And by next phase, they have identified what the objectives are for the next phase, which is all military tasks. These tasks are taking out Hamas, securing the border, and saving the hostages. If that doesn't sound like a ground war, I don't know what is. However, again, heavy emphasis on things are happening in increments, because when you look at the mission objectives and the way that the Israeli Defense Forces have listed them, it's take out Hamas, secure the border, and then get the hostages. We also have to consider that Israel is not in the most advantageous position to just throw all of their troops in one direction. Unlike many other countries in the world who love to do this tactic, Russia, Israel doesn't have the biggest population out there to pull from. In fact, they've literally pulled all of their reservists into this conflict. And so, Israel does not have the luxury of having mass casualties. Israel needs to be extremely methodical with their movements and operations. That's why you're not seeing all of the forces swiping across Gaza and then finding Hamas door-to-door operations. Now, something else I want to point out, I am not trying to sound one-sided or extremely biased. It's just almost impossible to get accurate news inside of Gaza. Mainly because there's no internet and journalists are quite literally hiding for their lives in Gaza. In fact, Israel has issued 2 separate warnings right before their initial phase where they started to go into Gaza, and currently, where Israel says if you are a journalist and you want to report inside of Gaza, you are risking your own life. So again, trying to get accurate information from within Gaza, a lot of the news stories are not quite accurate, and unfortunately, no matter what, the news is rather biased and one-sided because most of the information we are getting is straight from the Israeli Defense Forces. Something else you need to understand is that Israel has actually been rather covert and selective on what you're allowed to see. The images and videos that you see from Israeli Defense Forces, it's typically a D9 dozer knocking over a house, or it's a strike on a random location that is a military target. And so because of this, the only information we have is Israel is going after Hamas, dismantling all of Hamas, securing the border, and again, finding the hostages. Now, this is all in the context of Gaza. I'm going to end with this point in Gaza, and then we're going to move to the north of Israel. Israel has again dropped more leaflets on northern Gaza in the very dense populated cities to try and evacuate from Gaza. Now, this is typically what happens when militaries are about to go into an area of operation. Even the United States did this whenever they were about to go into Fallujah. You drop the leaflets, etc. So look out for more movement into the northern portions of Gaza where you're going to start seeing some more intense ground operations where it's really going to turn into door-to-door operations. Other than that, though, there's no evidence or indications that Israel has been trying to make a push to the center of Gaza. It looks like they're going to continue their air campaign and to continue to siege Gaza and to try and choke out Hamas. Now, just to give you some insight on how little we actually know what's going on, this is straight from the Israeli Defense Forces on their updates on what's going on in Gaza. And southern Israel is what they're calling it. A Hamas operator operated a drone that reached the area of the Gaza security fence. Both threats were neutralized. That's one update. And then there's only one other update. IDF soldiers continue their defensive activities along preparations for carrying out operational plans. Again, we are in the phase where they're actually inside the fence of Gaza. Now, let's move to the north, because this is also rather confusing. Don't get it twisted. Israel is fighting a multiple front war, one of the fronts being north, up in Lebanon. However, they're fighting Hezbollah. Now, what's interesting about this is that Israel, about a week ago from the time of this video, actually had a rather big issue with trying to control their borders, because Hezbollah is heavily armed and they're also really good at what they do. Hezbollah managed to literally take out tanker units and to cause a lot of casualties, so much so that Israel actually had to evacuate a few kilometers of the border from Lebanon and evacuate people back so no one else gets attacked from Hezbollah. However, Israel, again, has kept things rather quiet. I'm going to give you what the update is from the Israeli Defense Forces. Since the beginning of the conflict, IDF soldiers in the Northern Command have neutralized multiple bad guy cells in Lebanon. Very vague. Additionally, a bad guy cell was struck by the IDF after attempting to launch an anti-tank missile from Lebanon. And while we're here, I'm going to make this point. One thing you will notice about the differences between how this conflict is reported and maybe up in Ukraine is that the way that Ukraine is reported, it's 10,000 shells were launched for the day. But we don't know what those shells were going to or what the targets were. The way that Israel identifies their progress for the day is 250 targets were hit for the day, or 150 tunnel systems were hit for the day. However, you need to understand that number is probably way more inflated when it comes to how many munitions were used for that one target. Again, I'll say it again. 150 targets were taken out for the day. But you don't know if maybe that one target took like 30 munitions just to get taken out. So that's another thing that I've observed from this conflict and talking to some other people who are reporting this. Again, we don't know the exact amount of munitions that's actually hit Gaza and other cells around the conflict, like up in Lebanon and Syria. Okay, moving from Lebanon, let's go to the West Bank, because this part of the conflict is rather confusing. Again, everyone is focusing on Gaza, some people are focusing on Lebanon, and no one is focusing on the West Bank. There have been multiple raids upon multiple raids going into Jenin, quite literally looking for any sort of bad guy leaders who might be operating out of there, because Israel has the suspicion that a lot of the key leaders for Hamas are not even in Gaza, they're operating out of the West Bank. And so you literally have home videos of D9 dozers, again, just leveling out complexes, taking out whatever they need to take out to ensure that there's no sort of fighting positions who are trying to take out Israeli Defense Forces. Now, the main indicator is this. Israel is rather repetitive of their operations and how they do things, such as whenever there is an engineer unit using their dozers, typically not too long after that, you're going to have ground units like a light assault force or an armored force sweep on through. This is typical military fashion. I mean, Israel trains with the U.S. military. We do the exact same thing. Engineers lead the way, clear the route, and then allow for infantry to do what they need to do. And so Israel is showing many signs that they are wanting to do something in the West Bank. Again, everyone seems to be focusing on Gaza, and to be fair, Israeli Defense Forces are not even reporting on what's happening in the West Bank. I mean, it's a known thing that there's always clashes amongst the Israelis and the West Bank. Nonetheless, if you can, try to find some underground sources where you can see in Jenin, again, Jenin West Bank, you are seeing a lot of fighting and you're seeing a lot of interaction with Israeli combat engineers trying to get into the city and trying to clear lanes for infantry assault units. Now, as far as the conflict beyond the borders of Israel, again, this gets rather confusing because Israel is doing preemptive strikes in Syria. Israel has Syria on lockdown because, again, Syria is the gateway to try getting into Israel. That is the one front that if there's ever any military who's going to try messing with Israel, it's gonna be through Syria. And because of this, Israel has actually managed to take out headquarters and munitions facilities, even airport runways to try and suppressing these proxy units to head over towards Israel. This is honestly more or less a warning or an indicator that Israel, even though they are heavily occupied, they're still managing to force attacks or to have reconnaissance in an area beyond Israel. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. There's one country involved in Syria who's also really helping Israel, the United States. The U.S. military, unfortunately, has been receiving the brunt of the attacks of these proxy units within Syria. Having over 30 head injuries, we've had one heart attack from a contractor who was trying to run into a bunker. Nonetheless, it's because of these attacks. And because of this, again, Israel is heavily relying on the United States to take out these proxy units or to at least inform Israel on what's going on in Syria. And even beyond Syria, all the way to northern Iraq. Again, there are proxy units who use these logistics trains from Iraq to Syria to try to get through Jordan into the West Bank or try to get through Syria to take out Israel. And so the United States has started to commit more and more resources to the Middle East. You have missile defense systems being deployed into the region. You have strike carrier groups. You have more Marines being sent to the region. You have F-16s out there. You have F-15s out there, A-10s, a lot of resources right now. Now, don't get it twisted. We never left the Middle East, but let's be honest. When was the last time all of a sudden we've had this much hype in the Middle East? Something else I need to point out, one of the strikes actually instigated by the United States was directed straight from Joe Biden himself. So congratulations, Joe Biden. You actually practiced your power as a president to protect the assets of the U.S. military within Syria. Okay, so let's end with the people in Gaza, the civilians, the people who need humanitarian aid. Now, this humanitarian aid is finally starting to come in from Egypt. Now, Egypt, they're having their own issues. Nonetheless, they are allowing for trucks to go from Egypt into Gaza per Israel, because Israel wants every single one of those trucks checked before they actually go into Gaza. Now, if you're wondering why Israel has the ability to say who goes in and who does not go in, again, the people who are watching all of Gaza from the sky, it happens to be Israel with all of their reconnaissance assets and everything that's happening right now in Gaza. Something else we need to point out is that Israel needs to allow for this humanitarian aid to go in, whether or not they want it to go in, because it is the moral thing to do, but the U.S. military has said, we will only support you if you allow the humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. So that's a good thing, but again, many people are worried that a lot of this humanitarian aid is going to get stolen and put in the wrong hands. Now, there are a lot of indicators out there that this has already happened. I'm not going to report on it in this video, maybe a different video, because there is a news story out there that humanitarian aid was stolen from a UN complex, but again, that's not completely verified. But, you know, it happens, unfortunately, and there is a lot of evidence out there to show that it does happen. So again, this is good news for Gaza, but the terrible news is that there's no internet, there's like no resources out there for the medics to really do their job. And something else that's really terrifying is that apparently one of the major hospitals in Gaza is also the HQ for Hamas. Again, this is coming straight from Israel. I have no other resources to verify if that's true or not, but if it is true, this is going to be a very difficult problem for Israel to navigate. Now, at the end of the day, Israel is going to have a near impossible task of trying to complete all of their mission objectives. This whole trying to get the hostages back, I think we are beyond that phase. As long as humanitarian aid is coming into Gaza, no hostages will probably be returned. That's why Israel was a little reluctant, and the United States, to allow humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. Nonetheless, this is only getting worse and worse. You now have more outside threats from Turkey and Iran who are starting to be like, hey guys, why is nobody doing anything about Israel? We're going to stand with our people in Gaza, which is going to get very interesting, especially if you are a NATO partner to Turkey. Either way, we'll see what happens. I'll keep you guys updated. I'm on this 24/7, and it's very difficult to report both sides. Again, please don't get mad at me. Most of the information we get is only coming from Israel because they're showing the videos. Other than that, there's almost no journalists who are giving you direct access to the ground because they can't get the information out.